I thought our family was perfect until I opened my banking app after my brother's wedding reception. The number staring back at me made my blood run cold. $847. This morning, I had 9,247. Where the hell did $8,400 go? The wedding had been everything Mom dreamed of. Cascading white roses worth $3,000, a venue that screamed old money, 200 guests sipping champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's grocery budget. My brother Jake stood at the altar looking like a magazine cover, his new wife Sarah radiant in her custom Vera Wang gown. Everyone kept saying how lucky they were, how blessed our family was to pull off such an elegant affair. I'd been the one taking photos from the corner, trying to capture every perfect moment for the family album. The golden hour lighting filtered through the cathedral windows, making everything look like a fairy tale. Jake's groomsmen laughed at his nervous jokes. Sarah's bridesmaids fussed over her train. Mom floated around in her mother-of-the-groom dress, accepting compliments about the gorgeous celebration. But something felt off. Every time I tried to join conversations, they'd shift topics. When distant relatives asked about my job at the marketing firm, Mom would quickly redirect. Emily's been such a blessing, always helping family when we need it. The way she said it made my stomach twist, like I was some kind of family charity case instead of the successful 32-year-old woman I'd worked my ass off to become. During the reception, I'd noticed Mom whispering to Aunt Linda, gesturing toward me with that look. The one that said I was both indispensable and somehow pathetic for always being available. I caught fragments. So generous, never asks for anything back. Such a good daughter. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt like a prop in someone else's story. Now, staring at my phone screen in the empty church parking lot, the fairy tale was crumbling. I scrolled through my recent transactions with shaking fingers. There it was. An electronic transfer I definitely didn't authorize. $8,400. Moved this morning while I was getting ready for the wedding, probably while I was in the shower singing along to feel-good music, genuinely excited to celebrate my little brother. My emergency fund, the one I'd spent 8 years building, the safety net that let me sleep at night knowing I could handle whatever life threw at me, was nearly gone. Again. The word again hit me like a freight train. This wasn't the first time money had mysteriously vanished from my accounts. Jake's college graduation trip to Europe, $4,200. His car down payment when he totaled the old one, $6,800. The deposit on his first apartment when he couldn't qualify for the lease alone, $3,500. Mom's emergency dental work that somehow coincided with her desire for cosmetic veneers, $7,200. Every time there had been tears, desperation, family meetings where I was painted as the only one who could save the day. Emily, you're so responsible with money. We know you'll understand. We're family. We take care of each other. Except the taking care only went one direction. I sat in my car, designer heels kicked off, bridesmaid dress wrinkled, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Over the years, I'd given, nearly $50,000 to my family. Not once had anyone mentioned paying me back. Not once had anyone asked if I could afford it. They just assumed I could, and would, and should. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Thanks for everything today, sis. The wedding was perfect. You're the best." The best at what? Being a human ATM? I drove home in a daze, muscle memory navigating the familiar streets while my mind reeled. My apartment, the one I'd carefully chosen for its good bones and potential, planning to renovate slowly as my budget allowed, felt different when I walked in. The IKEA furniture I'd been meaning to upgrade, the walls I'd been planning to repaint, the kitchen appliances I'd been saving to replace. All of it suddenly felt like evidence of a life put on hold because I kept funding everyone else's dreams. I poured a glass of wine and sat on my second-hand couch, laptop open, bank statements spread across my coffee table like crime scene evidence. The pattern was undeniable. Every major family milestone, every emergency, every moment when someone else's happiness was at stake. There was Emily writing checks and making transfers and somehow always finding a way to say yes. But the asking had stopped being asking somewhere along the way. Tonight's $8,400 wasn't even a request. It was just taken. Like I was a shared family credit card with no spending limit and no billing statement. I'd become the family's financial insurance policy, and nobody had bothered to ask if I'd renewed my coverage. The wine wasn't helping. If anything, it was making the numbers on my statements blur together into one long ledger of self-sacrifice. I closed the laptop and tried to sleep, but every time I shut my eyes, I saw Mom's face at the reception. That satisfied smile when people complimented the wedding. The way she'd squeezed my shoulder and said, "Emily's just so generous. We're blessed to have her." Blessed. Like I was some kind of divine providence instead of a daughter who'd been systematically drained of her financial security. The next morning brought a text from Mom. "Hope you had fun last night. Sarah's parents were so impressed with how beautiful everything was. The family photos turned out lovely. You got some great shots. See you for Sunday dinner?" Sunday dinner. The weekly tradition where I brought wine and dessert, where conversation inevitably turned to someone's latest financial need, where solutions always seemed to involve my checkbook. I'd been attending religiously for years, thinking it meant I was a good daughter, a valued family member. Now I wondered if I was just the guest who always picked up the tab. I called in sick to work, something I never did, and spent the day doing research. Not the fun kind of research I did for marketing campaigns, but the soul-crushing kind where you Google phrases like family financial abuse and emotional manipulation tactics and find yourself nodding along to articles that feel like they were written about your exact life. Apparently, there was a term for what I'd become, the family scapegoat. Not the kind who gets blamed for everything wrong, but the kind who gets tagged as the solution for everything expensive. The responsible one, the successful one, the one who could always figure it out, always make it work, always come through, the one who never said no. But I was about to learn the cost of always saying yes. Sunday dinner arrived with its usual choreography. I showed up with a $20 bottle of wine and a bakery cheesecake, my contribution to the family meal that somehow always ended up being the most expensive items on the table. Dad carved the roast he'd splurged on because Emily's coming. Mom served vegetables from her garden, making sure everyone knew how much money she saved by growing her own food. Jake and Sarah arrived empty-handed but effusive with thanks, still glowing from their honeymoon in Hawaii. Their honeymoon in Hawaii, that they'd booked while I was financially recovering from their wedding. "Tell us about the resort," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Oh my God, Em, it was incredible," Sarah gushed. "The suite had a private beach access, and the spa treatments were amazing. We did this couple's massage that was literally life-changing." "Sounds expensive," I said. Jake laughed. "Worth every penny. You only get married once, right?" "Right," I said. "How much did the whole trip cost?" The table went quiet. It was the kind of question I'd never asked before, the kind that violated some unspoken family rule about money being too crude a topic for dinner conversation. "Em," Mom said carefully, "that's not really appropriate dinner talk." "Neither is taking $8,000 from my account without asking." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Sarah suddenly found her salad fascinating. Dad cleared his throat and reached for his water glass. Mom's face went through a progression of emotions: surprise, guilt, defensiveness, and finally, anger. "We didn't take anything," she said, her voice rising. "We're family. Family helps family." "I help family," I corrected. "Family takes from Emily." "That's not fair," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. "What's not fair is treating me like a bank instead of a sister. What's not fair is making financial decisions with my money without consulting me. What's not fair is spending $8,000 on a wedding and then taking $8,000 more for a honeymoon while I eat ramen and skip lunch to rebuild my emergency fund." "You never said you couldn't afford it," Mom shot back. "You never asked if I could." The truth hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. We all sat there breathing it in, the toxic realization that our family dynamics had been built on a foundation of financial exploitation disguised as love. "Emily," Mom said, her tone shifting to the patronizing sweetness she used when she wanted something, "you're being dramatic. Money isn't everything. Family is everything. We love you. You love my bank account." "That's enough," Dad said, but without his usual authority. He knew I was right. They all knew I was right. "No," I said, standing up. "It's not enough. It's not nearly enough. $50,000 over 8 years isn't enough. Being treated like a cash machine instead of a daughter isn't enough. Having my financial security stolen while you plan vacations isn't enough." "Emily, sit down," Mom commanded. I remained standing. "The Hawaiian resort Jake was just describing?" I looked it up. $12,000 for a week. $12,000! That's more than most people make in 3 months. And you spent it using money you took from my emergency fund without asking. "We didn't know it was your emergency fund," Sarah whispered. "Well, what did you think it was? Fun money? Monopoly cash? Every dollar in that account represents overtime I worked, meals I skipped, vacations I didn't take, things I didn't buy for myself so I could have security, and you spent it on massages and private beaches." Jake finally spoke up. If you needed the money, you should have said something." The audacity of that statement nearly knocked me over. I needed the money to remain in my account where I put it. I needed my family to treat me like a person with financial boundaries instead of a corporate sponsor. "You're being cruel," Mom said, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes, the same tears that had worked so many times before when I'd started to question the family financial dynamics. "I'm being honest. There's a difference." "We can pay you back," Jake offered weakly. "With what money? You just spent $12,000 on a vacation and you're both working part-time retail jobs. You couldn't pay back $47, let alone $47,000. The number shocked them. I could see it in their faces. They'd never added it up, never considered the cumulative impact of their financial emergencies on my life. $47,000? Dad repeated. $47,312. I have spreadsheets. I have bank statements. I have a paper trail of every time this family has treated me like a personal bailout fund." Mom's tears were flowing freely now. "Emily, honey, we never meant to hurt you. But you did. You hurt me financially, emotionally, and psychologically. You turned me into someone who can't say no to family because saying no makes me the bad guy. You trained me to believe that love means unlimited financial availability. That's not what we did," she protested. "That's exactly what you did. And the worst part is, you convinced me it was normal. That successful daughters are supposed to fund their families' lifestyles. That having boundaries makes me selfish." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. Legal documents, bank statements, a detailed accounting of every transaction. I set it on the dinner table between the roast and the cheesecake. "What is this?" Dad asked. "Documentation. Records. Proof of a pattern of financial abuse that's been going on for 8 years. "Financial abuse?" Mom's voice cracked. "Emily, we're your family. We love you. People who love me don't steal from me. People who love me don't treat me like an ATM. People who love me ask before making financial decisions that affect my life." I looked around at the table at their faces. Shock, guilt, anger, confusion. These people had raised me, loved me, shaped me into who I was. They were also the people who had systematically exploited my success and generosity until I'd lost sight of where family obligation ended and financial abuse began. "I'm done," I said quietly. "What do you mean, done?" Jake asked. "I mean I'm done being the family bank. I'm done having my financial security sacrificed for everyone else's wants. I'm done pretending this is normal." Mom stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "You can't just cut off your family, Emily. That's not how family works." "You cut me off first. You cut me off from having a voice in financial decisions that affected me. You cut me off from being seen as anything other than a source of money. You cut me off from having boundaries." "This is ridiculous," she said, her tears turning to anger. "You're being completely unreasonable. Family helps family. That's what families do. No, I said, my voice getting stronger. Healthy families communicate about money. Healthy families ask before taking. Healthy families don't exploit one member's success to fund everyone else's lifestyle. You're acting like we're criminals, Jake said. You took $8,000 from my account without permission while I was getting ready for your wedding. What would you call that? The question hung in the air unanswered because we all knew what it was called. Theft. Even when it's done by family. Even when it's done with a smile and a hug and a promise that everything will work out. We'll pay you back, Sarah said desperately. All of it. We'll figure out a payment plan. You'll pay me back with what money? You don't have jobs that could cover a $47,000 debt. You don't have assets. You don't even have a realistic understanding of how much money that actually is. I picked up my purse, leaving the folder on the table like evidence at a crime scene. Where are you going? Mom demanded. Home, to my apartment that I pay for with my money. To my life that I'm going to start living for myself. Emily, please, Dad said, speaking up for the first time in several minutes. Let's talk about this rationally. I am being rational. For the first time in 8 years, I'm being completely rational about this family's financial dynamics. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor I'd helped pay to refinish 3 years ago. If you leave now, Mom called after me, don't expect to be welcomed back with open arms. I turned around one last time. If I stay now, don't expect to have anything left to take. The door closed behind me with a soft click, sealing off 8 years of financial manipulation and emotional blackmail. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands shaking on the steering wheel, processing what had just happened. I'd just cut myself free from the family that had been slowly bleeding me dry, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. But I also knew this was just the beginning. They wouldn't give up easily. People who had been taking advantage of someone for 8 years don't typically accept that the arrangement is over without a fight. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Think about what you're doing to this family. I deleted it without responding and drove home, $47,000 poorer, but finally free to start rebuilding my life on my own terms. The war for my financial independence had just begun. The texts started at 6 a.m. the next morning. Mom, Jake, Sarah, even distant cousins I hadn't heard from in years, all variations of the same theme. Emily's having a breakdown. She's being unreasonable. Family needs to stick together. By noon, I had 37 missed calls and countless voicemails I refused to listen to. But something had shifted in me during that sleepless night. Instead of the familiar guilt that usually followed any pushback against my family's financial demands, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. For the first time in 8 years, I saw the situation with perfect vision, unclouded by manipulation and emotional blackmail. I'd spent the night researching, not just doom-scrolling through articles about family dysfunction, but actually building a strategy. Financial abuse was real. What my family had done to me had a name, documented patterns, legal implications. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. I was a victim who was finally ready to become a survivor. The folder I'd left on their dinner table wasn't just dramatic flair. It contained copies of every bank statement, every unauthorized transfer, every instance where my money had been used without my consent. I'd kept meticulous records without even realizing it, some deep part of my mind understanding that I might need proof someday. My phone rang again. This time it was Jake, and something in me decided to answer. Thank God, he said, his voice thick with what sounded like tears. Mom's been crying all night. Dad's not speaking to anyone. Sarah thinks you hate her. I don't hate anyone, I said calmly. I just finally understand what's been happening to me. What's been happening to you? Emily, we're family. We've always been close. You're acting like we're strangers. Jake, in the past 8 years, how much money have you borrowed from me? Silence. How much money have you paid back? More silence. How many times have you asked if I could afford to help before assuming I would? That's not fair. You never said you couldn't afford it. That's exactly my point. You never asked if I could. You just took. There's a difference between borrowing and taking, and our family stopped asking permission years ago. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. We didn't mean for it to be like that. Intent doesn't matter when the impact is $47,000, Jake. Intent doesn't matter when I've been eating ramen for dinner so you could eat at 5-star restaurants in Hawaii. We didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. Knowing would have meant acknowledging that I'm a person with limits instead of a renewable resource. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I called a therapist. Not just any therapist, but one who specialized in family financial abuse. Her name was Dr. Rebecca Martinez, and she had a waiting list, but when I explained my situation, she agreed to see me within the week. This is more common than you think, she told me during our first session. Successful adult children become financial safety nets for their families, often without realizing the psychological damage it causes. I thought I was being a good daughter. You were being an exploited daughter. There's a difference. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my family's behavior followed a textbook pattern. First, they'd identified me as the responsible one, the successful one, the one who could always figure things out. Then they'd gradually increased their financial requests, always framing them as emergencies or one-time needs. Finally, they'd stopped asking altogether, moving straight to expectation and entitlement. The fact that they took money without permission, she said, crosses the line from emotional manipulation into actual theft. Family relationship doesn't negate consent. I learned terms I'd never heard before. Financial codependency, economic abuse, monetary trauma bonding. I discovered that my inability to say no wasn't a character flaw. It was a conditioned response, carefully cultivated over years of emotional manipulation. What they did to you, Dr. Martinez explained, was train you to believe that love and money were the same thing. That supporting them financially was the only way to prove your love, and that questioning their financial decisions meant you didn't care about family. She was right. Every time I'd hesitated to hand over money, someone had questioned my love, my loyalty, my commitment to family values. I'd been gaslit into believing that financial boundaries were selfish, that success came with an obligation to support everyone around me. But the most important thing Dr. Martinez taught me was that I'd been preparing for this confrontation longer than I realized. The detailed record-keeping, the separate savings account they didn't know about, the way I'd instinctively protected certain assets. Part of me had always known this day would come. You're not a victim having a breakdown, she told me. You're a survivor taking control. The next phase of their campaign began on Thursday. Mom showed up at my office. I was in the middle of a client presentation when my assistant knocked on the conference room door. Emily, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent family business. I knew before I looked through the glass partition who it would be. Mom stood in our modern lobby looking smaller than usual, clutching her purse with both hands, wearing the same dress she'd worn to parent-teacher conferences when I was 12. The dress that said, "I'm just a concerned mother who wants what's best for her child." "I'll be right back," I told my client, stepping outside. "Mom, you can't be here. This is my workplace." "Emily, we need to talk. Really talk. Not like Sunday night when you were so upset." "I wasn't upset. I was finally telling the truth." "Honey, I know we made mistakes, but cutting off your entire family? That's not the Emily I raised. The Emily you raised couldn't say no to anything. The Emily you raised thought her value came from her bank account. Maybe it's time for a different Emily." She reached for my arm. "We can work this out. We're family." Working it out means acknowledging what happened. It means understanding that you took $47,000 from me without permission over 8 years. It means recognizing that my financial success isn't community property. "We never thought of it like that." "How did you think of it?" She faltered. We thought you wanted to help." I did want to help, but wanting to help and being exploited are different things. Helping means being asked. Helping means having a choice. Helping means the other person cares about the impact on your life. We do care. You care about what I can provide. You don't care about what it costs me. The conversation continued for 20 minutes in our lobby, with my coworkers pretending not to watch while Mom alternated between tears, anger, and manipulation tactics I now recognized thanks to Dr. Martinez. Love bombing. You're the most important person in our family. Guilt tripping. Your father hasn't spoken since Sunday. Gaslighting. You're remembering things differently than they happened. None of it worked. I have to get back to work, I told her finally. Emily, please, just come to dinner this Sunday. We'll talk through everything. There's nothing to talk through. I've made my decision. You can't just abandon your family. You abandoned me first. You abandoned the daughter who needed financial security for the ATM who could provide financial resources. I'm just making it official. I walked back to my conference room, leaving her standing in the lobby. Through the glass, I watched her stand there for several minutes before slowly walking away. For the first time, I felt genuinely sorry for her. Not the manipulative guilt I was used to, but actual sympathy for a woman who'd built her family's financial stability on the exploitation of her daughter and was now watching it crumble. But sympathy didn't mean I was going to change my mind. That weekend, I did something revolutionary. I spent money on myself. Not practical money for bills or groceries or the household items I'd been putting off buying while funding everyone else's lifestyle. Fun money. Frivolous money. Money that served no purpose except making me happy. I bought a couch. Not just any couch, but the gorgeous velvet sectional I'd been looking at for 2 years, telling myself I couldn't justify the expense while my family needed help with their various emergencies. I bought art for my walls, real art from local artists instead of the printouts I'd been using as placeholders. I booked a massage, a facial, a manicure, all the self-care I'd been skipping to preserve my emergency fund. The total came to just under $3,000. $3,000 that would have previously triggered massive guilt and anxiety. $3,000 that represented more than I'd spent on myself in the previous 2 years combined. $3,000 that felt like the first installment on reclaiming my life. My phone buzzed constantly with increasingly desperate messages. Jake offering to get a second job to pay me back. He didn't have a first job that paid enough to matter. Sarah suggesting family counseling, which would inevitably focus on getting me to resume my role as family financier. Dad finally speaking up to say I was breaking my mother's heart, which was rich coming from someone who'd watched me get exploited for years without saying a word. But the message that really got to me came from my cousin Lisa, someone I'd always respected. I don't know the whole story, but cutting off family seems extreme. Maybe you could just set some boundaries instead. I stared at that text for a long time before responding. I tried setting boundaries for 8 years. They ignored every single one. Sometimes cutting off is the only boundary that works. The truth was, I had tried setting boundaries. Gentle ones, reasonable ones. Boundaries so small they barely qualified as boundaries at all. I can only help with emergencies. I need advance notice for large amounts. I'd prefer if you asked before transferring money. Every single boundary had been steamrolled with emotional manipulation, family loyalty speeches, and crisis escalation until I backed down. The nuclear option, complete financial and personal separation, was the only boundary they couldn't ignore. Monday brought the phone call I'd been expecting. My lawyer, Patricia Chen, whom I'd consulted on Friday afternoon. Emily, I've reviewed all the documentation you provided. You have a strong case for financial elder abuse, even though you're not technically an elder. The pattern of unauthorized transfers, the amounts involved, the systematic nature of the exploitation. It's textbook financial abuse. What are my options? You could pursue criminal charges for theft. You could file a civil suit for recovery of funds. Or you could use the threat of legal action to ensure they never contact you again. What would you recommend? That depends on what you want to achieve. Do you want your money back, or do you want to be left alone? I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I want to be left alone. The money's gone. I've accepted that. But I want them to understand that what they did was illegal, not just hurtful. I can draft a cease and desist letter that outlines the legal violations and makes it clear that any further contact will result in criminal charges. Do it. The letter arrived at my parents' house on Wednesday, delivered by certified mail with signature required. Patricia had crafted it beautifully, professional, legal, terrifying. It outlined every unauthorized transfer, referenced relevant statutes about financial abuse and theft, and made it crystal clear that any further contact would be considered harassment and would result in immediate legal action. The silence that followed was deafening. No more texts, no more calls, no more showing up at my workplace. The sudden absence of their constant emotional pressure felt like stepping out of a noisy restaurant into peaceful quiet. I'd been carrying the weight of their financial neediness for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without that burden. But the real revelation came 2 weeks later, when I ran into my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, at the grocery store. "Emily, dear, I haven't seen your family visiting lately. I hope everything's all right." Mrs. Patterson was 78 and had lived next door to my parents for 30 years. She'd watched me grow up, had always been kind to me, and had no idea about the family dynamics that had just imploded. "We're taking some space right now," I said diplomatically. "Oh, that's probably wise. I've been worried about your parents' finances lately." I froze. "What do you mean?" "Well, the fancy cars, the expensive landscaping, your mother's shopping trips. Your father mentioned he was thinking about refinancing the house again. At their age, with retirement coming up, I just worry they're living beyond their means." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The emergencies that required my financial assistance. The lifestyle inflation that coincided with my career success. The way they always seemed to have money for luxuries while simultaneously needing my help with necessities. They'd been living beyond their means for years, using my money to subsidize a lifestyle they couldn't afford while I lived below my means to ensure I could always bail them out. I'd been funding their financial irresponsibility while sacrificing my own security. "Mrs. Patterson," I said carefully, "when did they buy the new cars?" "Oh, just after Jake's graduation. 2 brand new BMWs. Beautiful cars, but I remember thinking they seemed expensive for people about to retire." Jake's graduation, when I'd given them $6,000 for his emergency student loan payment. And the landscaping? Last spring. Complete backyard renovation with that expensive designer who was featured in the Home and Garden magazine must have cost $20,000 at least. Last spring, when I'd covered Mom's emergency dental work. Every financial emergency I'd solved had been immediately followed by a luxury purchase I'd known nothing about. Every time I'd tightened my belt to help them, they'd loosened theirs to spend more. They'd been using my financial responsibility to enable their financial recklessness. That night, I sat in my beautiful new living room on my gorgeous new couch, surrounded by art that made me happy, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the temporary absence of crisis that I'd mistaken for peace in the past, but actual deep, soul-level peace. I was free. Free from the 2 a.m. phone calls about financial emergencies. Free from the guilt that came with wanting to spend my own money on myself. Free from the exhausting mental gymnastics required to justify why I couldn't afford things while simultaneously funding everyone else's lifestyle. Free from being valued for my bank account instead of my heart. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Sarah. I got a new phone. We miss you. Jake got a job. We're trying to pay you back." I blocked the number without responding. 3 days later, another unknown number. "It's Jake. I know you don't want to talk, but I got hired at a warehouse. I'm going to pay you back every penny. I swear." Blocked. The next week, a letter arrived at my apartment. No return address, but I recognized Mom's handwriting. "Emily, we're going to counseling. We want to make things right. We love you." I threw it away without reading past the first line. They were doing exactly what Dr. Martinez had predicted. Love bombing, promising change, offering just enough hope to reel me back in. But the job Jake mentioned? Minimum wage, part-time. At that rate, paying back $47,000 would take him approximately 15 years, assuming he dedicated every single paycheck to debt repayment and somehow survived without income. It was a fantasy solution to make them feel better about what they'd done, not a realistic plan to address the damage they'd caused. But the real proof that nothing had changed came 6 weeks later, when I got a call from Aunt Linda. Emily, honey, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from your mother. My mother, who wasn't supposed to be contacting me at all per the cease and desist letter. I wanted you to know that your parents are struggling financially. They might lose the house. There it was. The crisis escalation, right on schedule, the emergency that was somehow my responsibility to solve, delivered through a third party to bypass my boundaries. Aunt Linda, I'm sorry to hear that, but their finances aren't my responsibility anymore. But Emily, they're your parents. Family takes care of family. Family that takes care of family asks permission before taking $47,000. Family that takes care of family doesn't exploit one member's success to fund everyone else's lifestyle. Family that takes care of family respects boundaries. I don't understand all the details, she said, but surely you can work something out. The details are that they've been stealing from me for 8 years. The details are that they used my money to buy luxury cars and expensive landscaping while telling me they needed help with basic necessities. The details are that I almost lost my financial security funding, their financial irresponsibility. Silence. I had no idea, Aunt Linda whispered. Nobody did, because they made sure of that. They made sure everyone saw me as the generous daughter and them as the grateful recipients, while the reality was that I was being systematically exploited. After I hung up, I realized something important. I felt nothing. No guilt, no anxiety, no urge to rescue them from the consequences of their financial choices. The crisis that would have sent me into panic mode 6 months ago now felt like someone else's problem, because it was someone else's problem. They'd created this situation by living beyond their means and using my money to subsidize their lifestyle. The solution wasn't for me to resume funding their irresponsibility. The solution was for them to face the reality of their actual income and adjust their lifestyle accordingly. For the first time in 8 years, their financial emergency was going to be solved by them, not by me. And I was going to be just fine. 6 months after that confrontation at Sunday dinner, I got a LinkedIn message from Jake. Not a personal message, a professional networking request. His profile showed he was working full-time at an accounting firm, had moved into a smaller apartment, and was taking night classes to finish his degree. I didn't accept the connection request, but I felt something unexpected. Pride. Not the twisted pride of enabling someone's poor decisions, but genuine pride in watching someone take responsibility for their own life. 3 months later, I saw Mom at the grocery store. She looked older, more tired, but also somehow lighter. She saw me before I could change aisles, and for a moment we just looked at each other. "You look good," she said finally. "Thank you." "I wanted you to know that we sold the house. Downsized. We're learning to live differently." I nodded. "I'm glad you're figuring it out." "Emily, Mom, I'm not ready for that conversation, but I'm glad you're taking care of yourselves." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked away. I finished my shopping and drove home to my apartment, where I was saving for a down payment on a house. My house, bought with my money, for my future. I was 32 years old and finally living like an adult instead of a family ATM. That evening, I made dinner for 2. Not because I was expecting company, but because my friend Rachel was coming over to celebrate her promotion. Rachel, who I'd met in a support group for adult children of financially abusive families. Rachel, who understood what it meant to reclaim your life from people who confused love with money. We ate dinner on my gorgeous couch, drinking wine that cost more than $20 a bottle, talking about our plans for the future. Real plans, based on our actual incomes and our personal goals, not the crisis management that had defined my life for so many years. "Do you ever regret it?" Rachel asked. "Cutting them off?" I thought about it seriously. I regret that it took me 8 years to do it. I regret how much money I lost. I regret how much of my life I spent feeling guilty for wanting financial security. But not the cutting off part. Not for a second. Best decision I ever made. And it was. The family that had raised me, loved me in their broken way, and systematically exploited me was gone. In its place, I'd built a chosen family of people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. People who celebrated my success instead of seeing it as a resource to be mined. People who understood that love and money were two completely different things. I was Emily Carter, successful marketing executive, owner of a beautiful apartment, saver for future goals, member of a chosen family that respected boundaries. I was no longer Emily Carter, the family ATM, the emergency contact for everyone else's financial irresponsibility, the daughter whose love was measured by her willingness to write checks. The transformation was complete. The daughter who had been financially exploited was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth had nothing to do with her bank account balance. And for the first time in 8 years, I was genuinely, completely, perfectly happy.